We live in a day of great turmoil, of political corruption and lawless lawmakers, of publicly celebrated sin and civil unrest, of crumbling empires, wars, rumors of wars, and a growing societal contempt of the living God, His Word, His people, and His Christ. In these ways, our day is similar to that of the early church. As the Roman Empire was in the death thrashes of its latter centuries, its trials were not unlike our own. And in the midst of this raging world grew a church built upon a particular rock. That rock was the common confession of the early Christians that Jesus is the Christ, the anointed King, Son of the living God, and that He is Lord of heaven and earth. Naturally, the powers of that age took issue with this confession and persecuted severely many that confessed it. Among the persecuted stood the faithful, those who refused under any circumstance to renounce their confession, earning for themselves the title of confessor. Just as the early church needed these fearless disciples, so today the church needs fearless men and women that will stand unmovable on the confession of the universal lordship of Jesus Christ. So join us on the Christ Confessors Podcast for a supplementary dose of theological teaching, evangelistic proclamation, and apologetic engagement as we work to aid the church in the formation and edification of Christ Confessors. Well, hello and welcome to the Christ Confessors Podcast. My name is Nathan Jacoby. So we're in a different location. We're in a different situation. But you might not know this because his face isn't famous, but his voice is. This is my good friend Cole Watson, kind of the forerunner of this very podcast, starting us off with 3R Thursdays for, what'd you do that for, like a year?
Yeah. Wow, a year.
Yeah.
And probably the last podcast we were on was probably a year ago.
Almost
a year ago.
Yeah, getting up there. But yeah, so I just wanted to take some time and talk with Cole. He's been doing some exciting things, and just thought it would be good to jump back in and have some conversations. So where you been? What you doing?
Where we at? Yeah. Nathan, first of all, man, you've been killing it with the podcast.
Thank you.
So this has just been incredible to see. Yeah. It's an honor to be here, to be on this podcast, to have this conversation, this dialogue with you. Man, I'm just so proud of you to see how the Lord's worked. Man, it's just cool to see it come to fruition and to see it be really fruitful. We are at the Watson Law Firm.
Yes.
We are here located in the business that got started about 4 months ago. The Lord has been very kind with work and with great clients. With great help as well, putting together a team here. And so I've been busy. Yeah, very, very busy getting this going. We're sitting in our conference room, joined by Quanta Parker and Cynthia Ann Parker as well. So, they are looking over our shoulders right now.
They're watching over us.
But yes, very, very excited to be here. Things have been very busy. To get started with the law firm in a small town, practicing estate planning and real estate, helping people, what I say, prepare for death. Prepare for life after death, especially, and then solve real estate issues along the way. And so the Lord's been kind. We've been very busy. But yeah, excited to be here and excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, well, great. So the thing that I thought would be good for us to talk about is, so we're coming up on we're in the midst of one of the craziest election cycles I've ever seen. We're coming up on the election day or whatever they call it. And in the midst of all of this, we have just chaos. We have rampant immigration. We have, government overreach. We have moral decay in our nation.
Sure.
So many different things that are going on, and we live in a chaotic world, and our lives seem unsure in a lot of ways. And so the question I want to ask and want to explore is, why build? Why are you in particular building in the midst of all of this chaos?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. I mean, I think the level of chaos, moral decay, institutions are failing families, and as a result, families are failing their communities are failing the state. The church is almost going by the wayside as sort of accessory, I think, to even if we can consider modern day America that still goes to church. So building in particular, I think, comes with a mandate as men in particular. Western civilization depends on the strength of men. It depends on our ability to look into the midst of chaos and look into the midst of confusion and disorder, lies, and ultimately enemy attacks that are coming, and refuse to bow down, refuse to bend the knee. And with that comes the ability to rise up institutions. And I know we'll double click on this here in a bit, but that doesn't necessarily mean having to start a whole new enterprise, a whole new culture, a whole new business. It could very well be taking the existing institutions in place and being faithful men of Christ and proclaiming the gospel in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the confusion. So we can take it a number of points here. I think with the Watson law firm in particular, that's what I saw as well, was just a need to serve the community. I can look at a variety of attorneys in the area, great practitioners. I simply just saw an entrepreneurial opportunity, if you will. And with that comes the ability to trust the Lord. Yes, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of staring into the abyss, so to speak. But we serve a mighty God, and He is the light that goes before us. And so when He calls, when He beckons, then that's ultimately what it looks like to build, is just to follow His lead.
Yeah. Well, and I think that I love that point, because as you're talking, I'm reminded of at the beginning, at the time of creation, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form, the earth was void, and it is out of this chaotic world that He creates order. He creates the you might even call the institutions of day and night, of seasons, and then creates a habitable world, and then inhabits the world. And so I think that us engaging in building, I would even say that this podcast is a form of that.
Absolutely.
This is episode 9, I think. And so, we're in the early stages, but, Lord willing, we'll go on and be a ministry. And so God creates out of chaos. So I think whenever God sees chaos, He sees opportunity. He sees, a fertile soil to plant something glorious. And so I think you're absolutely right. We are following the lead of God in building in the midst of chaos. That's how He operates a lot.
I see the story of Nehemiah in particular as well.
Yeah.
Right? We have ruin, we have chaos, destruction, and it's impressed upon Nehemiah to go and rebuild the wall, right? To set up a formidable foundation to bring God's people home. And a lot of people, the wall, right? That's a little soundbite during the election cycle here as well. But I think even on that front, right, the wall that we're going back to Nehemiah's time was not just a defense mechanism, if you will. It wasn't just to keep enemies out, and somehow that was the whole purpose of building the wall. But really, it was to inculcate. It was the ability to say, no, all the people located within the wall, those are God's people. Yeah. And we're going to delineate ourselves and separate from the rest of the world, but that necessarily requires that we put up walls.
Yeah.
We put up, quite literally, their physical structure. But even more importantly, and really the lesson I think that can be derived there, is how are we establishing walls, right? How are we defining ourselves as Christians, right? In the midst of a very watered down, soft gospel that is often proclaimed on social media or otherwise, how are we defining ourselves based on biblical principles, standing by the truth of God's word, and establishing those walls, right, in place to say, this is what we're building. We're not only building, yes, to protect, but to inculcate, right? To have the ability to build a culture inside those walls, to establish ourselves. And then, Lord willing, for generations to come, we stand by that culture that was created and not just let the world steamroll us and make us all uniform, totally dots in a vast landscape here.
Yeah. Wow. You're so articulate. I love it.
Half the coffee is gone, people.
Yeah, that's the...
Get ready.
So I think that one of the reason that the question even comes up in my mind, I think, of why should we build in chaos, is because I think that at least for me, I've grown up, which I mean, we're from the same church essentially, but I've grown up in a church culture of imminent doom. Might be a harsh way to put it, but an understanding of the world in that we're in the home stretch, we're on the back end, and I don't know that some of the people that tout this understanding would agree with the idea that means that why bother building, but for me that was kind of a conclusion that I drew. Why bother building whenever all of this is going away? All of this is going to be cast down. Christ is going to return. He's going to be the builder. Why should I do any building in this moment? So what do you think? What is our answer to that understanding? And what do we say to those people that hold to a view of imminent, conclusion to the world, consummation of the world, or whatever you might call it?
It's a really good question. We talked about the, I want to say it was last November, eschatology, the doctrine of hope.
Yeah.
And I don't remember if we necessarily got on this point in particular, but when we think about the end times, the imminent doom, that should provide us a certain level of hope, right? Christ comes. When he comes, no one knows. So in the meantime, that gives us the mandate to continue to finish out the work that he's called us to. I think, I know where you're coming from too. I'll just make the point out loud. It's amazing how often certain people with certain white or gray hairs have the sense of imminent return of Christ, right? Whether it's the end of their own life is perhaps where I would take it. And so there is a certain level of my life here on this earth is about to end. Therefore, what does it matter about building? All good and well. I'm not here to double down on that in particular. I'm more here to say, no, Lord willing, and I take the averages of, a man in my lifestyle and health and, status and all that kind of stuff. Still got a decent time left on earth.
Sure.
Yes, could always get hit by a bus. Could always, choke on a piece of steak, whatever it might be. Pending or setting all that aside, we still have the mandate to go and make disciples. And so I think the next question that follows is, how do we make disciples? What's the best way to make disciples? What's the most efficient way to make disciples? If that's truly the mandate, then how do we set up our lives in such a way to do that, to accomplish that? I love to use the parable of the 10 talents, Matthew 25, I believe. The master gives to his servants, there's 3. He gives them 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1 talent. Talent is basically, I think, 20 years' wages. And the master goes away, right? So in the parable, we can see, okay, here's Christ giving us the keys to the kingdom, really, this incredible means in which to make good, right? To capitalize on the investment, on the gift that he's given to us. And so what happens? The guy with the 5 talents goes and makes 5 more, right? He gets after it. He goes to work and he says, oh my goodness, I've been entrusted with this incredible means by which I can do good. And so he does. And the master comes back and, it's well done, good and faithful servant. You've been in charge with little, now you've been in charge with much. The guy with the 1 talent though, who might have had the sense of, well, the master's going to come back soon. And what he says is, I don't want to squander it. I know he's a harsh master. He goes and buries the talent.
Yeah.
Buries the talent. Master comes back. The master says, you wicked and slothful servant, right? And throws him into the place of gnashing and weeping of teeth, all that kind of, story that we get. And so that's the frame that I use to answer this question of why build? What's the point? If we truly believe that we serve an almighty, holy God that was incarnate here on the earth, that died a death that only a perfect Son of God could die in place of our sins. And not only that, but then rises from the dead and then commissions his disciples to make more disciples. Okay, well, let's do that. And so with that would say, how do we go and again, make disciples? So then I think we look at things like the family. How do we get the family established? That's almost the the only way, in some sense, to make disciples is to raise them yourself. Have them with you all the time.
Yeah.
Have a lot of them and bring them along. That spills over to the church, spills over to the community, spills over to your business and your place of work. All these avenues suddenly become battlegrounds or mission fields in which you can proclaim the gospel, and not only proclaim the gospel, but make disciples. So that I guess that's my why. It might have been too much of a tangent.
No. Well, yeah. So look, I want to circle back a little bit to. I think that you're absolutely right. We are commissioned to make disciples. That's our ultimate mission on the earth in this time.
Yep.
We are to build up Christ's kingdom by proclaiming His authority. Right. So you look at Matthew 28. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Christ is King. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so our commission to go and make disciples is directly connected to Christ's authority in all the earth. And so what the apostles ask Christ as he's about to ascend to the right hand of the Father, they ask him in Acts chapter 1, verse 6, it says, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? So kind of an eschatological moment of this has been prophesied for generations. This is the time. Is this when it will finally come to fruition? And Christ's response is, it is not for you to know times and seasons that the Father has fixed by His authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. And so Christ's statement there is, don't worry about the when. You have a mission. It doesn't matter if you have a day, a week, or 1,000 years. This is your mission, and you need to be busy at your mission, regardless of when Christ returns. I don't think he actually said it. It's attributed to him, but it is said that Martin Luther at one point was asked, if you knew that Christ was coming back tomorrow, what would you do? And what would you do for the day? And his response was, plant a tree. Right? So there's this.
That's good.
Why?
Wow.
Why plant a tree whenever you know that Christ is going to return and all of this is going to change anyways? But his mindset is, it doesn't matter if Christ comes tomorrow. I need to have long-term thinking. I need to be doing the work that Christ has given me, whether or not I'm at the very beginning of it or at the very end. And so, I think that long-term thinking is, and again, I don't know that I would say that the people that really hold to this more imminent view of eschatology would agree with the idea that, we don't engage as much in long-term thinking, but that was what I received. That's what I inferred from the communication given to me, that, okay, let's not worry about what my great-grandchildren are going to be doing. I'm probably not even going to have great-grandchildren. Christ is going to return. He's going to establish His kingdom, whatever. But, and in that discussion that we had on eschatology, I made clear that I have a eschatology of hope. I have a long-term eschatology. I hold to postmillennialism, and so I believe that ultimately the gospel will be absolutely successful in this world, in this age, and at the fullness of that being fulfilled, Christ will return. So that's kind of my stance coming at this, but you don't have to have that stance, and that's kind of our point here, is you can believe that Christ could literally come any day, and you're commanded to build. Go and you are to be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. The being a witness in this context isn't simply just letting people know. It's build a church, build a kingdom of faithful believers in the Lord Jesus Christ. That is the mission that they are given. And the timing of it is not at all their concern.
It's a really good point. Yeah. I was thinking just then too, if you ask the question, even you'd say, go back to Martin Luther's quote there, and you ask them, okay, let's say that Christ returns in 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. I would wager he would have the same answer. Right? Yeah. Plant a tree.
Plant a tree.
You have that long-term thinking. And frankly, I think it shifts just about everything in your mind if you can plan for things that are 10 years down the road, 100 years down the road, 1,000 years down the road, instead of being caught up in our society's zeitgeist of instant gratification, right? Mm-hmm. Things that just simply go by the wayside, a one and done, so to speak. You got the K-cups, right? Use them once, you throw them away. Right. Even this podcasting extent, right? People will scroll past this or listen past this and keep going to the next thing. But Lord willing, we will come back in a year from now or 10 years from now and listen to this conversation and just see, wow, it was really incredible to see the Lord working at that time. Mm-hmm. So getting into that mindset of, okay, we're not going to grow the tree in a day, but we can certainly plant the tree in a day. And then keep planting trees, right? And keep seeing the life take over and grow into really, healthy, robust forest, right? If we continue that analogy.
Sure.
It's difficult. It's just a really difficult mindset shift. But I think if we have that ability and looking maybe at our families in particular, looking at our churches in particular, having that frame of reference going into those institutions, saying that it's not a matter of what we accomplish tonight at the dinner table that matters. Mm-hmm. But it's the fact that we're going to be having hundreds of nights at the dinner table.
Yeah.
That's the point. Like, that is the whole reason that we set this up. And so when we have that long-term thinking, I think it certainly reframes those difficult moments and those difficult times where we're saying, what in the world's going on, right? This doesn't feel good. We don't like for this to happen. This is difficult. We're expecting our third in November, and we've had so many conversations, my wife and I, around what are we going to do? There's only two of us. How are we going to have the ability to take care of 3 children? Yet we know that families have done that forever, hundreds and hundreds of years. So Same thing, I think, with the church as well. I think it's really easy to get caught up with, okay, this is just the church culture, and this is just what we have to accept, and this is just the way things have been. Yet, if we take that long-term mentality and we think about, if we truly believe that this church will be around for another 100 years, how do we approach our Sunday programming? How do we approach our Sunday evening discipleship? How do we approach our Wednesday discipleship? How do we approach our life groups in a way that truly takes this belief of long-term, 100 years, let's just pick on that, and brings it into the fray every single time? So yes, it's not accomplished on one day, but after 100 life groups, after 100 sermons, our church should look more like Christ. We should be discipling its members more and in a better way, because ultimately that is the mission that we've been placed with.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I love that idea, that mindset of it's not about tonight's dinner. It's about, 100 dinners or 1,000 dinners. It's so I have an example of this mindset in the church in particular. So we both have had opportunities to preach on Sunday morning. Yep. And I don't know about you, for me, whenever I first started doing that, when I was given that opportunity, I had this mindset of, this is my opportunity. I don't get a lot of these. I gotta proclaim the gospel. Yep. So if anybody's going to be saved under my preaching, or anybody's going to change their life under my preaching, this has to be it. And I had this one-off mindset, this one and done. This is my time. Let's do this. And after a few times of that, and it's just like seeing, okay, some people might be mildly affected by some of the things that I say. I'm realizing it's not about the one Sunday that I got to engage. I am but a brick in that. And you take that if the church is going to be here in 100 years, that's what, 5,000 sermons from now. roughly.
Yeah.
And so I'm just one sermon in 5,000
Yep.
that will affect, or at this point, maybe like not quite 10, I don't think, but take you. Yours is one sermon, hopefully more, but one sermon in 5,000 out of the next 100 years.
Yep.
And so you're just one brick
Yep.
in that massive building that we're building in building up this church. And so I think, having that, and that's kind of connected to the long-term mindset, but it's bit by bit. Mm. It's I almost said modernity. It's monotonous. I can't think of the word. But it's the mundane. Mundanity? Is that a word? I don't know. But it's the mundane, daily in and out things that we do every day. Mm. That is about building. And so it's not about founding necessarily institutions, as we've said. Mm-hmm. It is sometimes, a case in point, just building a law firm from the ground up and using it to minister to people and to build community and to help people and families and all of these different things. And help your own family in the process. Build up your own family.
That's exactly right.
And so sometimes it is about growing from the ground up, but also sometimes it's about going into your church with the 100-year mindset of, what are the people 100 years from now going to remember about this time? What are they going to look back on and say, I'm either thankful or ashamed of what my church was doing 100 years ago in 2024. And so with that mindset, I think that we're more prone to be like, okay, just because this is one sermon, or just because this is one life group, or 1 week at church, one time for me to worship, one time to put my envelope in the offering plate or whatever. Mm-hmm. Each of these faithful actions is just one more step in our journey toward kingdom building, toward building up institutions and churches and whatnot. And we're focused in on the church because this podcast is largely about the church. But I think surrounding the church also, we have other institutions that are incredibly important. So I would call yours a business, but also an institution, a law firm, especially a faithful one that is intended to help people and to not just be a money grab. That's a needed thing.
Very much so. Yeah. I love the analogy of just one brick in the wall too. Mm-hmm. That's a Pink Floyd song, right? All in all, you're just another brick in the wall.
Educate me. I don't know.
Well, no.
I don't even know education. I think that's a Pink Floyd song, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong.
I think they go hand in hand.
I didn't know we were going to get into Pink Floyd. I didn't expect
that's
that.
Fine. I love that analogy. I think that's so important. I think it's also really important to recognize that we're not, going back to church real quick, we're not just putting our brick on the ground level, right? Our church in particular has been around for 100 plus years.
Almost 135.
135 years.
Next year it'll be 135.
Yeah. Which is crazy, because then you zoom out a little bit more, 130 years is like nothing. Right. You just look at it and you're like, oh, well, that's not that old. That's crazy. There's still operating churches in Europe, I'm guessing we can still call them churches, that are thousands of the years old. And so just having that ability to zoom out, right, to bend the mind a little bit around the concept of time, and then get back to, great, I'm going to faithfully lay my brick in place. I'm going to faithfully do my due diligence. We stand on the shoulders of giants, like that concept as well. So we're even being in this building. I've been able to share this with a lot of the town fathers here as well. Is I didn't build this building. We happen to sit on the second story here. There's a bank underneath us. I didn't found the bank, right? I didn't get that started. I didn't do the innumerable number of transactions and relationship developed that allowed them to then build this building. I'm simply the benefactor of sitting here now and establishing my law practice here. And you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, that was a need that I saw, is that there's a need for an attorney in this community. There's just simply, it's just simply a numbers game. There are a certain number of people and there's a certain number of attorneys, and those attorneys cannot accommodate all those people. I had a great mentor in college, fantastic guy, old school attorney. He was very influential in the scholarship foundation that I was a part of as well. And he would always want to get a hold of the college students that thought they wanted to go to law school. And he would run them through the course of basically, look, why do you want to go to law school? Okay, you just want to make a lot of money. Well, how you make a lot of money in law is that you have to go to the best college, and then you have to have the best grades, and then you have to get into the best law school, and you have to have the best grades in law school, and you have to have the best clerkship, and then you have to be able to go and get to the best firm, and then only when you're at the best firm, then you get to have the best salary. And it's like, great, that just 25 years of your life, so you can finally feel like you're making enough money.
Yeah,
is that really what you want? And little sophomore, junior Cole at UT was like, oh no, it's not what I want at all. That's not what I have in mind. I don't want to go and live that life. And so kind of coming full circle, I mean, yes, went to law school. Yes, passed the bar. Yes, opened up my own practice. Quick little caveat on that. We're still off Wall Street, so I'm technically a Wall Street attorney. And I got a corner office off Wall Street. So I love throwing that in there. But
Wall Street in Iowa Park, Texas.
In Iowa Park, Texas, right? There's 6,000 people here. And so it's truly different. How you service people in a town of 6,000 people is just truly different than when you're in a firm of 6,000 attorneys.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just a different mindset. It's a different level of service. Another mentor of mine, so that even I got started, he called law practice a cottage industry. Never thought of it that way before. Never thought of it the ability where you would just basically serve a local community. Mm-hmm. I think back in the day, every industry.
Just making sure you're still on.
Still on. Every industry was cottage in the sense of, okay, you had the baker, right? And you had the butcher, and you had the cobbler, right? They're all serving their community with their services, with their trades. Mm-hmm. Big business can take over. We have the McDonald's effect. We can have a McDonald's hamburger quite literally at any part of the country, and it's the exact same product. Law firms have attempted to do that in very particular areas of law, big corporations in particular. But when it comes down to boots on the ground, brass tacks, the legal profession as it existed forever, it was serving the local community. Mm-hmm. That was the whole point. You delineate now between a general practitioner and someone who specializes. The person who specializes can, in theory, make more money. You are serving a very particular subset of the market, and it's certainly not local. You have to expand your reach, perhaps across the state, if not across the nation, just depending on the nature of the work. What I'm attempting to do here is not fall into the worldly trap of I have to be the most successful attorney, or I have to make the most money, or I have to have the best systems, or I have to have the best marketing. If I truly show up every day with just a service mindset of I have work to do and I'm going to do it for the glory of God. These are our three pillars. For the glory of God, know that it's always the right thing to do the right thing, and then work where my feet are because it takes what it takes. Mm-hmm. That I'm not getting ahead of myself, right? I'm not trying to shortcut the work that is necessarily required to be successful. Because yes, I do want to be a successful attorney. I do want to provide for my family. I do want to build a business here that potentially could be handed off to my sons, mm-hmm. right? To be handed off in a way that can continue through the generations. My grandfather here was the town doctor. So I love being able to hear stories about him, how he served the same community. The Watson name goes very far in that regard as well. So there's a lot of those bona fides, those good things that go before me. And so, yes, I'm capitalizing that. I'm not going to mince words there, but it's a matter of then continuing that legacy. So Going back to that, I'm standing on the shoulder of giants, right? I wouldn't be in this building without those men. I wouldn't be in this town without my grandfather, my grandmother, my dad, my mom, all those people that have gone before me. Then it allows me to continue carrying the torch, right? To continue putting those bricks in place day after day.
Yeah. Well, and I love that. I love that description. The analogy I think could be that, you have a tree and the tree produces fruit, You know, somebody else 100 years ago planted a tree, and I can now eat the fruit from that tree. And that is a beautiful and glorious thing.
It really is.
But it would be a shame if I ate the fruit from the tree and then took the seeds at the center of the fruit and threw them in the fire. You missed your opportunity. And I think that's kind of that's where we are in America. Is we have an amazing heritage of Christian faithfulness for 300-ish years, and we're taking the seed from the fruit of that, and we are throwing it in the fire as a culture, as a society. And so it is so important for us to recognize that we aren't the first people, and we won't be the last. And so we need to look at our society and primarily our, like you said, grow where your, how did you put it? Work where your feet are.
Grow where planted.
Grow where you're planted. Like in your community, take the fruit of the people that you never knew and whose names you don't know, but who worked so that you could have what you have. Take their fruit and take the seeds therein and plant them. Use them and grow what they gave you, because the next generation or the next 3 generations will look back, Lord willing, with gratitude at the tree that you planted. And so, so like you said, this is hopefully an institution that you'll be able to hand off to your son. And if not your sons, then perhaps somebody who is, your son's age, something like that. Or obviously the same age as your son. Now, it would be really irresponsible for you to give
probably shouldn't do that.
your law firm to a 3-year-old. But the point stands that we have a very individualistic mindset, not recognizing that we aren't the first and we won't be the last. And so we need to, I think about I will park in the far distant future whenever I'm about to die. And it's like, that's not the far distant future. That's barely later on. Like that is, we need to think about what will this community be and what will this church be? What institutions and culture and whatnot, what will it be in 100 years, in 1,000 years, if the Lord tarries? What do we do? What work should we be doing now to ensure that in 100 years we're not looked back on with contempt because we weren't faithful in this time?
That's a really good question. I think one of the things we really focus on in our life group, and we're going through the book of Acts, is if you take really a generation that simply assumes the gospel, then the next generation confuses the gospel, and then the next generation forgets the gospel. So I think we're in the forget the gospel generation. This generation is doesn't even have a touch point of who Jesus is, the story even of Jesus, let alone the ministry, the theology, the inerrancy of the Bible. We're in a very sad and demonic time where our society writ large does not know the gospel. And so then when we kind of zoom back in real quick to Iowa Park, Texas is not, I wouldn't wager your average, TikToker, Instagrammer, tweeter, whatever, right? There's still this concept, I think, here of small town values and Friday Night Lights and, God bless America, faith, family, and football, and that kind of, indoctrinated culture that we have here. And I think people are grasping on it even harder. We see a lot of sports culture take over simply because what else are you going to grab a hold of? What else are you going to put your kids through that you think is important? So yes, sports, grit, determination, teamwork, leadership, etc. I think it's still a proxy for a gaping hole that even exists in small town America, small town Texas, Iowa Park, Texas in particular. And so when we flip it and we say, okay, we are on mission to make disciples. How do we make disciples? How do we inculcate? How do we create a culture within our purview, within our family, within our church or community, then things like perhaps school becomes a question. Things like worship becomes a question. Things like how do we function as a church body become a question. And then ultimately, going back to what we initially said, we don't assume the gospel. We just start with the basic building blocks of here is a all-powerful God that loves us so much that he created us. What? God created us? We didn't just appear? No, we didn't just appear. We were intentionally created to have fellowship and relationship with God. Great. Why do we not have fellowship and relationship with God? Well, we do this thing in which we violate the holy nature of God. We simply call it sin. Because we sin, we cannot have fellowship with God. Well, that seems mean. No, that seems like God is powerful and
seems
mighty
like justice
and holy and just. And that is good. So then how do we have a relationship with God? I'm glad you asked. We can't. We simply will always fail. We can never do anything, say anything, think anything that gets us to a relationship with God. So we're doomed for life. No. It's amazing because God loved us so much that he sent his only son to this world to live a perfect life and die a criminal's death, ultimately so that he could be raised again and be seated at the right hand of God, such that we could have fellowship now with God through his son, Jesus Christ. And that's the gospel. That's the truth that we proclaim. Everything else is built around that. So we don't assume that gospel, so we don't confuse that gospel, so we don't forget that gospel. We put the gospel at the very center of everything we do, and then we build around that. And then we proclaim the word. And then we start structuring our church in a way that can proclaim the gospel, that can disciple the people, to open up the word, to ask really difficult questions. Yes, ministry, evangelism, very important. Bring them back into the church. But I would err on the side of discipling those that are already in the church, such that the church doesn't assume the gospel and confuse the gospel and forget the gospel. Because we can see that in churches today too, churches that have simply forgot the gospel. We can move around, to schools in particular. We can move around to communities at large. But I think really where it starts with us and the listeners, people as well, we should all be a part of a Bible-believing, Christ-confessing church. And within those walls, I promise you, there are people that have not only assumed, but confused the gospel, which is why it's all the more imperative that we, as the leaders, as the men in that church, will proclaim the truth of the gospel such that it is not confused for generations to come.
Absolutely. I love that. That's great. Yeah, I think it's Doug Wilson, who we always seem to reference, and who always seems to be getting himself in trouble. But he has this distinction of the church and the kingdom, where we see both of them in Scripture, but how do we describe them, and how are they different? And I think the answer he gives, and I absolutely agree with him, is, well, whenever you go to church and you're in the community, that's the church. And then whenever you leave and you go to work at your law firm, or go work as an IT guy, or you're building your business, you're building your family, that's the kingdom. Whenever the church gets outside of its walls and builds its institutions up, that's the kingdom.
Good.
And so, yeah, I think that the core of that is the gospel ministry, which of course is incredibly important within the life of the church, but also the family. And it's from that gospel living that you have a gospel community, a community of people redeemed, a community of people that are reconciled not just to God, but to each other through the gospel. And you're able to live with a godly diversity. That's a huge thing in our culture. We want to force diversity and equity and inclusion and all of these things. But the fact is that Christ is the missing link in that most of the time.
Absolutely.
You read Ephesians 2, the first half of it talks about Christ's work in bringing us individually to reconciliation with God. And the second half you see where it talks about Christ creating in the incredibly different and contrary groups of people, the Jews and the Gentiles and whoever else. In these, he creates a new man. He unites them as they are reconciled to Christ, they are reconciled to each other, and you're able to build a greater community through that. And so if you want DEI, this is probably a dangerous statement, but if you want that kind of diversity that our culture idolizes, the fact is that Christ is the unifier of people, regardless of gender and skin color and anything else that could possibly divide us. If we all look to Christ, we are all in Christ, and we are all one new man. We are unified. So yeah, unity with diversity is a glorious and a good thing. But if it's Christless, then it is destructive and damaging and only brings about chaos and sin and possibly death. And so, yeah, we have been given the commission, make disciples. And in the working out of that commission, we have families, we have churches, and from the outside of those things, we build institutions and businesses and community. We build up culture. We add to the culture. I'm a musician, and I'm involved in a number of bands where we create music and we release it. We're adding to the culture, and it's Christ glorifying on our part. And so every Christian, every Christ confessor can take what they are given, the fruit of the land that they live in, the community that they are planted, and they can run with it for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of the kingdom of Christ. That is what we are called to do. And so even in the midst of all of the chaos is just ripe for order. It's ready. It's ready to be ordered and built up so as to glorify God. That is the situation in which we find ourselves. And it takes bravery. It takes endurance. You mentioned Ezra and Nehemiah earlier. The command that they were given is you are to have a trowel for your mason work as you're building the wall in one hand and your sword in the other. So you're working and you're defending because they were building the wall, but they were also fighting off people that were trying to stop them. And so there's endurance that needs to take place. We need to stand firm as we are building and not compromise. If we compromise at the foundations or at any point in it, the institution that we are building will die. It will be removed. It will be cut off like a fruitless branch. And so it is important for us to conform what we are building to Christ, to the standard that we have been given, to counter the culture with better culture, with Christ exalting culture, to counter the pagan religion of our day, which, believe me, it's there, with true religion of worshiping the true living God, of keeping ourselves unstained from the world, of caring for orphans and widows, as James puts it. And so we have been given this commission, and it is vitally important that we are faithful, because we do not want to be the servant who took his talent and buried it in the sand. Yeah. That is a shameful place to be. We need to take our 5 or our 2 and double it. Yep. We need to take these things that we have been given and use them for the glory of Christ.
Amen. Yeah.
You have any closing thoughts? Any follow-up?
Man, I just appreciate you getting this going. There's a book I want to recommend as well.
Yeah.
No Apologies. It's by Anthony Esselin. Why Civilization Depends on the Strength of Men. Just crucial, I think, to recognize. Our society is so quick to put men down, to just make us amorphous blobs that are all entertained by the same programming, the rootless institutions, entertainment, that we would take a firm stance and say, no, we as men are been tasked with leading our families and leading our churches, leading our communities, and not being apologetic about it.
Yeah.
Not trying to mince words, certainly not domineering, in that sense, but being able to rise up. To just conclude on that note, I think it's chapter 2 or 3 of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is in front of the people, and he has really proclaimed and tasked the people with the vision that God has given him to build up that wall. And it's the people that say back to Nehemiah, let us rise and build. So they strengthen their hands for the work of the ministry. I think that's where we're at. We're in a crossroads. It's time to rise up and build. Grow where planted, work where your feet are. It's always the right thing to do the right thing. It's ultimately for God's glory.
Yeah.
With that, I don't think we can be stopped. I think we can take heart that we would not let that flame be assuaged, that we would continue to fight and continue the good work.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. I love that book too. I haven't read it, but I love the concept of it. Actually, we have a couple episodes coming down the pike with our pastor, Josh Fields, where we talk about biblical manhood and womanhood. And I think that will tie in nicely with this. So I love that. So thank you so much for joining us on the Christ Confessors podcast. This has been an excellent honor. I love the office that we sit in. It feels like a law firm, but not one that's going to cheat you, but one that will be faithful and help you to build your family. So if you're in the area, Watson Law Firm, not sponsored, but definitely a friend of the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, fear Christ more than you fear the world, and love Christ more than you love the world. This is Christ Confessors.